Well, I'm going to start off, and then Eleanor is going to actually take over and kind of um, run the webinar. And maybe it is very helpful, everybody who is online here. If you're not talking, put your phone or your computer on mute. That really helps to block out any noise in the background from you guys. Trust me, you can just about hear everything that goes on in your house, dog barking, a cat meowing, and so really helpful if you put it on mute. And then when we get to the question answer session, you just, when you want to say something, unmute yourself. So, well, thanks very much, everyone, for coming on this webinar. I hope you're all staying safe through these unprecedented times. A couple of weeks ago, Debbie Zimmerman and myself, we were talking, these are just unusual times everywhere, and even in the vineyards. We all look and face a certain uncertainty, and I know everybody's thinking, and how do we get through this? And especially in our vineyards, it's a perennial crop, so we obviously need to maintain the vineyards. And I know everybody is probably asking himself or themselves, how do we save some money? So we should probably put on a seminar, and what can we safely do in the vineyards to cut costs? Where do we cut costs, and where do we really not? We shouldn't cut costs at all. So we reached out to Dr. Jim Willwerth, I think 2 weeks ago, discussed it, and he was very willing to jump in and said, let's do a webinar. And maybe who knows how this goes. At the end, if you guys do like see more seminars and have some ideas about topics, then you can suggest them to us, email them in, or just call me or Eleanor, and we see if we in the future can put on some more webinars such as today. So I think, Eleanor, I'm going to let you introduce Dr. Jim Willwerth, and then we take Jim has, I think, about 20 minutes or 25 minutes of a presentation, if even that long. And then we're just going to have some open discussions and a question and answer session. So, Eleanor?
Perfect. Thanks, Matthias. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. We are here to welcome Dr. Jim Willwerth, who I'm sure many of you know. He's the Senior Staff Scientist for Viticulture at CCOVI, as well as an adjunct professor in the Department of Biological Science at Brock, where he focuses on applied research and outreach for the Ontario and Canadian grape and wine industry. He's a valuable resource, and we're happy to have him here. Today, he's going to be delivering a presentation on the economics of crop management during COVID, which will take approximately 15-20 minutes, at which time then we'll begin the Q&A session and have an open discussion on where growers can save money and where growers should be spending their time. And if you've not already done so, as Matthias mentioned, just put your device on mute, and this will be recorded, so whoever hasn't been able to participate, or if you've missed something, the recording will be available online, and we will be sure to e-blast that to all our members. So with that, I will get Jim to take it away.
Thank you very much, Eleanor. Thank you, Matthias and Debbie and everybody at the GGO for facilitating this. I think this is a great way to communicate. I mean, we have the technology now to do this. Maybe some of you have some stocks in Zoom. I mean, it's one of these companies that's really booming, and it's been a really great tool. So hopefully, this presentation and discussion can really help just facilitate some thoughts and group discussions on how COVID is impacting your business and impacting farms, and particularly vineyards. So I have a brief presentation that I just want to put things into perspective. These are probably a lot of things that you think about as a grower anyways, but with COVID-19, there are some issues and some trickle down effects of the shutdown that we're in right now, and the uncertainties moving forward. So, it brings something up to the forefront. So the title is The Economics of Crop Management During COVID-19. It's more of just talking about, vineyard management, risk management, and improving economics, but particularly during COVID-19. So just to put things, let me get my presentation working here. Just to put things in perspective, it is unprecedented times, as Matthias said. We are in a global pandemic. So, I mean, this is a global issue. It's not just a Canadian issue. And we all know this impacts our health, our economy, our borders. Look, and that has some impacts on us as farmers here, and obviously our social structure and literally every aspect of our lives. And agriculture and food may be highly impacted. And a lot of this is due to issues that we're facing right now, especially in the short term with workforce. And then there could be potential supply and demand in the entire value chain. You see it here about outbreaks with some of the processing plants in Alberta and so on. So what does that mean long term with food supply? And the UN is now concerned that if this pandemic goes for a long time and we're dealing with these shutdowns, that a global food shortage could be next, particularly in some of the in the developing world and so on. So food security is going to become to the forefront of this whole thing, which might be really good for many of us in agriculture, but particularly you as farmers. That down in the future coming out of this, there may be more in support, especially for local, and we are seeing that even with I think a little bit just with respect to online sales with our wines in the region. People are looking at supporting. So anyways, there's a lot of uncertainty. That goes without saying. And then one of the things is obviously the topic of today is how is this impacting grape growing? And in some cases, not a lot in some regards. I mean, the vines are still growing. I mean, and farmers are always dealing with fluctuations and uncertainty. This is something you deal with every year. This is just more uncertainty at this point in time. The other thing that COVID is having a big impact and is making things more difficult is with things like our workforce issues and how we rely on our offshore workers. And there's issues now with respect to access to people, as well as physical distancing that I'll talk about a little bit. And that causes some logistical issues, some increased costs, as well as potentially some reduced revenue as well. The one thing that this will also do, and that it's not just farming, but just businesses in general, is it may force some decisions to be made from a business or operational standpoint and make you take a harder look at things because of the situation that we're in right now. And particularly if this becomes more of a long-term impact, which we don't know. So what are some of the impacts directly to grape growing? Well, the workforce, getting required workers on the farms. Some of you are still waiting for workers, or you might not get as many as you'd like. And then once workers arrive, there's quarantines upon arrival. And then there's also the issue of, okay, what happens if one of the workers gets sick? And then there's additional quarantines. How does that impact you? Physical distancing. And how that impacts, living conditions, farming, transporting people. All of this leads to probably increased costs, definitely some less efficiency on farms and shortage of workers. The good thing for us right now as a grape grower is that you don't have a harvest coming up in the next month. I think this is really, really impacting asparagus farmers and some other people that have a lot of work to do. We obviously have a lot of work to do, but harvest isn't here right now. So I have to look at the positive on that respect. I don't know if this will have an impact in terms of equipment and inputs, in terms of access to supplies, parts. A lot of our equipment is from Europe, so a lot of our suppliers have a lot of inventory here to deal with shipping. But I mean, again, if there's long-term issues, then we might start to see some of these access to supplies and so on can diminish. The biggest thing is really the uncertainty. How long will these measures be in place? Are we looking at physical distancing at harvest? When are things opening up? So there's the short and long-term impacts. And the other thing is just general anxiety. Anxiety for our health, our teams, people coming from other countries to work here are anxious. We're anxious, for everything, for our own sanity throughout this whole thing even. So, this is probably the greatest issue with this is the uncertainty. And, how many of you have financial planners right now? And are you getting information nonstop about how this is impacting markets and looking at short-term, long-term, and that type of thing? And then there's the trickle-down effects, and that's everywhere. So for grapes, how are wine sales? How is tourism going to be impacted and so on? And so those are just there's a million trickle-down effects for the smallest little detail. makes it's more difficult now. So one of the things that you should always be thinking about, and usually this is a decision you think about in the off season, but again, this comes more to the forefront when you're dealing with uncertainty, is asking questions about your whole vineyard operation, your business, and individual blocks. And this is going to vary for everybody. I mean, every operation is different, but some of the things you should be thinking about in asking questions is, what are your contracts? What do they look like? Things like, how is my vineyard health? Does the block have a lot of virus issues, or a lot of missing or dying vines? Am I dealing with a constant cold injury in the block, and those types of things? And that leads to also the performance issues. So how are my vineyards performing? Is it a young block that's just coming into its own? Is it my best performing block in terms of yields or quality? Or is it one of those old blocks that's getting diminishing returns every year? And that could be just for the fact that the vines are old, or the fact that they might have viruses or so on. And the next thing is also, what kind of demand has the fruit from the block had? Is it a high value cultivar? So if you crop it less, you're getting more money per ton. Is it highly sought after, or is it one of those varieties that's getting tougher to sell and grow, and it's getting harder every year? So these are just general questions to ask, and that really helps impact how you're going to manage the farm and move forward on that farm or on that block. So this is something that Matthias touched upon, and it's really vineyard management philosophy in general, is that you're looking at a woody perennial plant. They're managed over many years, not just one. It's like an investment, right? And you don't look at it right at this moment, but it's what its future has. And one of the things that can happen is, if you make decisions this year, they're going to impact future years. And the thing is that it's usually the bad decisions that really impact things in the future. And if you don't do certain tasks, that could really have a big impact. And we've learned this through, a perfect example is winter injury, and how we try to get ahead of the game and have spare parts on the vines and so on. And that way we're making decisions this year, and it's looking forward for the future and renewing those vines, getting them back in good health. So that's just one example. Now, because of the situation we're in, and the risk management and how much inputs you're going to put in the vineyard, like this may be a year that you won't actually do everything that you normally do, or extra things that you like to do, especially things that we've doing just for looks or appearances. So this might be a year that you don't beat yourself over your head if you feel like you're not getting as much done that you'd like to do. I'm not sure if this is the year that you really want to focus on that. And in some scenarios for 2020, just like any year, but this might be even more true for this year, is that it may be a year that you're cropping less in some of your blocks or all of your blocks, but at the same time you're improving the quality. Maybe a year that you decide to walk away from a block, especially some of those really underperforming blocks that you've had problems with, and the inputs are greater than the revenues. Some blocks, it might just be business as usual. Your operation might be basically business as usual, depending on the size and scale of your operation, your workforce, and so on. And probably more likely than anything, it's a combination of all. And this is probably very common for any year, not just this year. So I want to put that into perspective. Now, there's some management decisions that should never be cut in terms of when you're managing a block. And you have to maintain the key vineyard practices, especially ones that impact the long-term health, consistency, and sustainability of the vineyard. First and foremost is integrated pest management. You don't want to sacrifice your vineyard, particularly the long-term health of the vineyard, by not spraying. So don't sacrifice the health by cutting your sprays, especially canopy sprays and things like that. The other issue that you shouldn't stop for this year, just because if it's a year with less revenue, for example, you do not want to reduce your vector management for viruses either. We're dealing with a human virus right now with COVID-19. In our vineyards, we're dealing with pandemics too, and the vines can't physically distance themselves. And so what we have to do is help maintain low populations of vectors, not only for helping your own vineyard, but helping your neighbors and helping the industry as a whole. So please don't cut down on that type of aspect in your vineyard if you have to cut any costs. I think that's really, really important. And I think the fact that we're dealing with this as humans, I think that puts it in perspective of both this, how it works with vines too. The other thing is we're really fortunate this past year that, knock on wood, that we have very good bud survival across all of our varieties. So we don't have a lot of extra vine renewals or establishment, but again, do not cut down on any of those procedures that you've had in place for good vine renewals and so on. So if you've been dealing with winter injury, continue on with your trunk replacement, suckers, and so on. Don't give up on that. Obviously, pruning and tying, that's a really important part, and it's already been done for the most part. I think probably just a little bit of tying left. And the same thing with your young vines. The young vines, if you're establishing a new vineyard, especially if you've got nice clean plant material that you put in the ground, treat those well. Don't let the weeds get out of control and so on, because again, you're growing for the future here. And then the other thing is major canopy management practices and crop management. So you can reduce some aspects of canopy management, but for you don't want to have just huge jungles that are going to end up with lots of shading and disease issues. And the same thing with crop management. You don't want to overcrop your vines and maintain. You want to maintain some good health through good crop management. In terms of crop management, a lot of this is controlled based on what the vines give you and what the varieties are, and it can be very block specific. Obviously, vine health determines a lot of how much crop are on those vines. We also deal with the growing season aspects in terms of, we have to have some crop on the vines to slow down vine growth, or may have to cut some fruit in terms of maturity concerns. A lot of this has to do with our variable growing seasons. And obviously contract obligations are the other aspect, depending on what your winery wants of you, or if you're a winery grower, looking at what you want out of those blocks. So in terms of crop control, a lot of our crop control is already dictated to us right now as we speak, because pruning is the main way to dictate potential crop size. Now, if you think that you may be having reduced crops this year for a variety of reasons, some early adjustments can still be possible. If you still haven't tied yet, you could do things like you cut your cane shorter, remove an extra cane that you have, or change your tying method. So if you can go from like a Pendelbogen system to like a flat cane system, so arch cane to a flat cane, and that'll reduce your number of buds per meter row. The other thing that can be done is shoot thinning, and it's a good way to control crop levels, but also can improve the canopy microclimate. But again, when you're adjusting your bud numbers and your crop sizes, remember that these are going hand in hand with vigor. So if you have a vigor issue, you want to be careful with dropping a lot of crop, especially if it's one of your better blocks. So this whole issue comes down to crop load and vine balance. And so if you reduce the number of buds, shoots per meter row, and then especially if you're thinning fruit early, that will all increase your vine size. So something to think about there when you are managing the block. Now we're looking at doing a potential webinar in June to discuss the specifics of crop thinning in 2020. We'll see how that goes and what Matthias and the GGO feel and what comes out of the discussions today as well. But in general, the timing and severity of when you thin not only impacts the total yields, but also your cluster weights, berry weights, and fruit composition. And with that, also vigor. So there's advantages and disadvantages of thinning fruit at different times, and different cultivars will respond differently to different shoot densities, so your number of shoots per meter row as well as your crop load. So an example would be if you think, oh, you know what, I'm going to cut off my fruit really early and then I'll have lower yields at harvest. But what happens if you thin really early, you will get yield compensation. You'll have bigger berries, bigger clusters, and the vines will actually compensate for themselves, especially if you do it, let's say, at flowering. So it's something to think about in terms of how your thinning is going to impact your yields at harvest. And we did a webinar in terms of crop estimation with the GGO, CCOVI and the GGO. We put a webinar together. So and it talks about crop estimation in the vineyard. So that's another thing that is really important and can help you determine about fruit thinning. So what are some of the management decisions and cost savings if you're during the COVID-19 pandemic? You know, like what kind of impacts are you going to have, and how can you have some cost savings? And that's a really tough one, because you talk to an established grower and they're saying already, we're already running on tight margins. So what do I have to do if there's some increased costs I need to cut? One of the first things, and this goes just in any year and just the way things are going in terms of manual labor, is again, try to continue to reduce labor intensive activities, especially if they're ones that aren't really needed. And I give a couple examples here. One is manual leaf removal, especially if you're going to do it late and do it severely, like 100% leaf removal at veraison, for example. That's going to take a lot of time and you're not going to get the great benefits of it. We've done some work at CCOVI with myself and Belinda Kemp and Debbie Ingalls and looking at manual and mechanical leaf removal. And there's been studies also in Michigan State and so on. And, mechanical leaf removal a lot of times gives just as good or better fruit quality, especially if you can get in there early and do it. So that's a perfect example. We've invested in a lot of technologies. Take that and use that to your advantage. If you do have one or your neighbor has one, look at mechanical leaf removal versus sending your crews out, especially if you have reduced crews. Same thing with finicky canopy management. Do the important work, like do your shoot positioning before you do mechanical leaf removal. That's really important, but you don't have to go and make sure every little shoot is tucked and that type of thing. Not unless you're looking for work for people, but I'm not sure if that's a particular year where you're going to be looking at some of that finicky work. The other thing comes down to soil management and cover crops. Maybe this is a year you leave everything as permanent sod. Don't work the ground. Don't do your alternate row cover crops. Leave it as a permanent sod. The other thing is maybe you don't grade pull as much if you're doing mechanical. Or if you're not against herbicides, maybe it's a year you do some herbicides and you don't keep things as tidy either. Don't have weeds growing up into your fruiting zone, but it might be a year to be doing things like that and looking at these as cost savings maybe in general too. The other thing is maybe focus more on lower yielding blocks, produce the best you can versus having huge amount of tonnage, especially if you are being asked to produce less fruit. Put focus on your best blocks. And in some cases, you might be putting even more attention to these blocks in 2020 compared to other years, just because of that this off year, let's say. I think the other thing that's really, really important during this time, and this goes without saying, goes in our social lives, it goes with us at Rock, everybody, is to continue to support each other with resources and to improve efficiencies. So, it might even be in reducing transportation of people. If someone has a leaf removal, like I said, if you can work together, and I know a lot of you do, continue to do this type of thing to help improve efficiencies and just work together through all of this. So in terms of some final thoughts, and we can have lots of discussion on here, and I'd like to have, some of the Grape Growers of Ontario board members and so on participate in the discussion as well. But I think one of the first things is to be positive. We don't know what the future has, so we can't do a lot about it. So we have to maintain some positivity, especially with our workers, with our teams. It goes a long way, and we want to have the best positive attitude as we can. Like I said, as growers, you're always dealing with uncertainties and risk management. This is just another level. When it comes to some decision making, there's going to be some immediate decisions that have to be made in the short term, but don't forget about the future health and management of your farms and your individual blocks. This is it's like not making that rash decision. It's like if you're in a long-term investor in the stock market, you just don't pull everything out right now because you think it's rough. That you'll come out better on the other side. And I think the same thing, we're going to come out better on the other side here. But so don't sacrifice your key parts of your vineyard. Like I said, we're all in this together, and we need to continue to support each other and our teams. And that I think that I've seen a lot of support in Canada and our region and in the world, and we have to just continue that, especially in agriculture. We have the technology now, and I think really good, open and good communication within the industry is really important. Growers and any processors here, have really good open communication, especially if we have physical distancing. I think that's really, really important moving forward in dealing with this crisis is having good communication. And that goes between all of us here in this webinar, industry stakeholders, and also us with research and outreach. I'm really happy to be here today to help support. And if I do anything, at least, it's just getting people together in a virtual seminar like this and getting people talking. We don't have the coffee shops to talk and see what's going on. So maybe we need more of this during these times. So with that, I'd like to thank the Grape Growers of Ontario, and we could take some questions and have some discussions.
Thank you very much, Tim. Certainly very informative. A lot of topics you touched on, topics within topics. Certainly those are different times, but like I said, in every crisis, there's also an opportunity. It might be hard to see this, but you touched on a few things. Obviously, everybody will take a lot closer look at his operation and see what he needs to do. Where can he start saving some money, do some cuts, but also look at it. Where shouldn't I cut? Maybe now is the time where you look at some blocks, like you said. Are they really performing the way they should? And am I just turning the wheels in there and actually losing money? I don't have a contact for certain blocks. Maybe I need to talk to my processors, and there's an opportunity to, transition into something else, have a different strategy. So a lot of good things. It is, not status quo out there in every shape, way, or form. So there's a lot of good topics here that we can probably follow up on, but I know there's probably questions, and I think, Eleanor, I'm not sure how we're going to handle this.
If
unmute yourself if you have a question.
There is a chat function, so for those on different devices, you can certainly type your questions in, or if you wanted to just, I can see everyone's faces. If you turn your video on, raise your hand. Otherwise, you can just ask away. And we also, I noticed we have Sud on here and Deb Ingles as well. So we got a couple researchers from CCOVI. So by all means, we're here to help answer any questions you have, not necessarily on this topic, but Phil Clark, question. I think you might be on mute there, Phil, though.
Is that better now?
Yes.
Yep, we can hear you.
What's your view on dropping fertilizer this year, excluding it from your practices this year?
Well, again, that's a good question. Reduced fertilization might be in the cards this year, especially if your blocks are already, in good shape. If they're deficient, I wouldn't cut back because that's going to have, again, long-term impacts. You don't want to fall behind, but definitely reduced fertilization is another way you can save some costs, particularly there.
So Phil, I won't tell Arnie you asked that question, right? Arnie left. Just kidding. No, but that's a good question. You're right. And there might be blocks, like Jim said, we can do it. And we are certainly looking at this as well. But I know there's blocks I won't and I can't do it. So. Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be a recipe across the board. I mean, that's why I kind of talked about looking at your own blocks, and it's going to differ depending on your particular vineyard, what you're growing, what your contracts are looking like, and so on. Other questions?
I have a question with when it goes to vector control. Obviously, that's one that we would look at first because it's a certain, spraying for the vector control is very expensive. And there's a thought out there that if you have done it diligently for the last couple of years, and I don't know if you can answer that question. If not, maybe we'll have to get the answer. You could skip a year, right? I mean, going after mealybug, if you're very diligent for the last 2 or 3 years, maybe there's an opportunity to say, I'm going to take a break. Is there any information on that?
What I'm going to do is I'm going to defer that one to Sid since he's the expert and he's here.
Uh-oh. Didn't want to put Sid on the spot here.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, that's a good question. Again, it depends on whether you have a virus or not, first in your block. There is a scenario where you have mealybugs, for example, but you don't have a virus in your block. Then if in that case, because mealybugs itself is not considered as a major pest that can significantly reduce the quality or plant growth, in that case, I would say I can skip it. But if you have a virus in your block, and if you have some plants, some vines that are not infected, and some vines have the virus, in that case, I would really go and control the vector. I won't leave that option. I won't walk away from the vector control, even though it's such a year. But you have to be very careful in choosing that for the control, especially because you don't want to leave a block with 10% of virus infection with the mealybugs in it, and then if you don't control it, you'll end up maybe 20-25% next year.
Great. That's yeah. Gives me a little bit of clearer picture, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So we have a question in the chat from Curtis. Any thoughts on chemical suckering? We have gone to it particularly on hybrids and labruscas in the past couple of years and found large savings in labor costs, considering it for strong vinifera blocks, especially with good winter survival. So if you have any comments on that.
Are these like established vines, mature vines that you're talking about?
Says considering it for a strong vinifera block, so I'm assuming.
I assume so. Yeah. Yeah, it's worth trying. I haven't done a lot of work with chemical suckering at all. But if you are using herbicides in the block, it probably would be an idea. Anyone have any experience with chemical suckering here? You definitely don't want to be doing it if you're reestablishing a block. You're trying to keep some suckers. You want to be careful with that aspect of things. When you're looking at some of those hybrids and labruscas, you've got just big, thick trunks, and you're not and you don't have to worry about any suckers from the base. So you have to think about it that way. If they're younger plants, younger trunks, I'd be a little bit more concerned with the vinifera.
And Chris MK is asking, which chemicals do you use? Ignite?
Curtis is using AIM on established blocks.
Yeah, I'm sure Ignite would do that. We have no experience with it, but Ignite certainly, I think, it's one that you could use, right? So.
What I would do though is I would definitely do an experiment first. Don't do the whole farm. Do you use your oldest vines, your strongest vinifera, and see. But I wouldn't try this on the whole farm right away.
Yeah, that's great suggestion.
I have a question for the growers and everybody in the room. Is what's your biggest anxiety right now, or your issues that you're facing? Is it workforce issues, physical distancing, that type of thing, and just trying to get the work done right now?
Anyone have any idea? What are you anxious about?
Oh, yes.
Are we going to do a webinar on that, Eleanor? You might want to answer.
Bill, did you have a comment?
I see everyone still has their sense of humor. That's good.
Oh, yeah. Don't repeat what Bill Shank just posted.
I'll let people read that one.
There we go.
Tom Wiley's says learning e-baking.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, there's a lot of uncertainty, and we're just right now. It's just we're still putting our heads down and just trying to get the jobs done, right? You know, the vines aren't going to stop. Things have to happen.
I've got a question on virus testing, since virus-infected vines were mentioned throughout the presentation, and that would be, is the CCOVI lab accepting virus tests right now, and should growers still be focusing on testing, or should we be focusing on just visual symptoms for this current year to manage virus in the vineyard?
Good question, Elena. Actually, we follow Brock University health guidelines. So in that sense, you know, both service lab as well as the virus testing services from Brock has been suspended. And, you know, the Brock strictly says that it's only essential research that is being carried out. So for now, which means the essential research, the research that is only on COVID-19. So as soon as they give us green signal, we are ready to open. But as of today, I have to say no, we are not open yet. But you know, I am available through email, phone, video, anything. If any grower wants any consultation, we are always open to help growers. Any day.
Can I just pipe in that basically at Brock, it's kind of a week by week basis where assessments are done. So, you know, things may change in a couple of weeks, or, you know, depending on what Premier Ford says in terms of opening things back up to restart the economy. So, you know, best just to check back on the CCOVI website regularly, and we'll let you know as soon as we're able to be back open. Research may tail behind service. So depending on, you know, whether we can make a case for essential service for the testing, you know, we may be able to do some limited type of testing with all the precautions in place for physical distancing, you know, coming onto campus. The problem right now is that the entire campus is locked down except for one entrance. So there's not an easy way to come in to get to CCOVI even if we were to reopen. So please just check back on the website, and we'll keep you up to date as best we can.
And that's great, Deb. Thanks so much. Just back to the group chat, Craig Wismer touched on some chemical suckering, saying that they've been hesitant to go full bore because they've rarely consistently had 100% old mature trunks in vinifera, but mechanical suckering is showing good promise, similar to equipment costs without attached chemical costs. And then Chris MK also saw some good mechanical suckering options as well. And then Mark Alton's been asking if there's been any indication from the wineries if they will be reducing grape purchases due to lower tourism and events.
I can take that quickly. Obviously, that is one of the uncertainty that Tim, you were talking about. Obviously, it's, you know, everybody is anxious to see, you know, obviously tourism's been shut down. We know that the winery stores are very well closed down. All they do is online sales. We did have some cut in tonnages even before this pandemic. So we're engaging our wineries and partners and processors very, very closely there. Everybody's monitoring what's going on, and so far so good. There has been reasonable support on online sales, and we hope that this will continue. But you know, who knows? We're all hoping that, I don't know, maybe I'm dreaming, maybe we'll have somewhat of a tourist season this year, but only encourage you that, like I said, be in touch with your processors, be in touch with us, and we will update you. And yeah, so who knows? So far, there has been some cuts, but as far as I know, sales have been growing not too badly. And I know we have some winery guys on there. Maybe they can comment. So hopefully that keeps up. There's a lot of local support, and that's a good sign.
Hey, Matthias, it's Doug Vernder.
Okay.
What kind of wine is selling? BQA or cheaper wine, higher end, whatever.
So obviously, what has done really well is the bag-in-a-box in the last couple weeks, even in the month of March, for obvious reasons. It's value price. There's no doubt about this. It's easy to store, and also these off-site stores are still open, and so obviously, but there's also, as I understand, there's a good online business with a lot of the wineries as well. So, but bag-in-a-box has performed very, very well. I don't know if that answers your question, Doug.
Matthias, Scott here. Just from the numbers I was seeing, right now, anything with alcohol in it is selling, no matter where you are in the world. The question is, how long does this stay up? Because everybody is way up. Restaurants are gone and stuff like that. But LCBO, anything online, is doing gangbuster business. Just how many weeks does this keep up is the great question. No one knows the answer to. Yeah, so that's a good point. So we all, obviously, right when everything shut down, sales were just going crazy. It's kept up. And I was reading an article even in Germany, wine sales up by 30%. Maybe let me clarify, like bag-in-a-box, it's a value pricing, but we understand even some higher end bag-in-a-box, which is being done. Those are, I think, they're up as well. So yeah, so you're right, Scott. Who knows? We all are waiting, kind of almost like the shoe to drop, but who knows? Obviously, people are at home. For some reason, they're still consuming. That's a good thing, wine and other spirits and beer. So. I was going to Niagara Falls the other day, and there was a lineup at the LCBO at Stanford Center, and there was no lineup at the grocery store, but there was a lineup at the LCBO. And then I came back again, and I drove by the virtual LCBO, and there was a lineup there as well. So who knows? We're monitoring it closely. So it's hopefully it keeps up, and hopefully we open up sooner or later again.
Has anyone heard any issues with supply issues for farmers this summer?
I've heard that there's been.
Is that a potential issues? Like for pesticides or anything like that?
So we've been in touch with our supplier. They don't foresee that yet, but who knows, right? So again, it all depends what this is changing daily or weekly. So at the moment we haven't had any issues, but we have gone into pest management in a big way yet, right? So
Mm-hmm. So is everyone or most people finished all with their pruning and tying now, just ready for bud break?
There was, Jim, just to interrupt there was one comment from Curtis saying that he was told there would be some delays in suppliers shipping pesticides, but I think that has to do with more so everyone's ordering online. So I've heard that there's been issues with shipping across the board on all products just because the social distancing and the shipping warehouses is creating delays, and there's a huge demand for online. And Chris MK says he's just waiting for bud break. Jim, from
so we have some. We have some tying left to do, obviously, because our labor force was reduced there. We were actually, once they shut the borders, our offshore help was supposed to come the next day. They obviously didn't make it on the first go around, and then it looked like we weren't going to have offshore. But thank goodness, thank God for OFVGA and farms and Canadian Hog Council, so some long negotiations and hard work, they have started arriving again. Ours came back April 9th, and they were in quarantine for 2 weeks, and they came out of that today. And they're starting tomorrow, with a little bit of tying left. And yeah, so we're in good shape, but there's still some pruning and tying to be done out there. So, because everybody was still late, it was the labor force, right? So
yeah. Like I was saying to some people, the cooler April has been good for us in that respect, that we're not off to a really early bud break and so on. And hopefully we don't have any more like colder weather. I think most of you, if not all of you that I recognize you that are on here, are subscribers to Vine Alert. We did send out a message last week with critical temperatures for developing buds and post bud break, and recommended temperatures for your wind machines if you have them. So continue to follow that as we get through. And if there's any issues that we see coming up, we'll send out an alert as well. So just maintain to your vineyards, look at those, monitor those, see what's pushing, and then adjust wind machines accordingly if you have them.
Just some chats going on the group chat. Mark Alton was commenting that Chinese supplies can be limited and more expensive. That's for like bottles on the winery side, inputs for the processors. And Ed Hughes is wondering if the housing is the housing considered workplace areas, and is physical distancing required? So Matthias, you might know about that.
So that's a great question. So this is an ongoing process, and so obviously, maybe speaking to this, I can only encourage every one of you guys who has offshore help to do absolutely what is right. And having said that, what is right, that's changing every day. You guys see the updates from farms and Canadian Hog Council, and we as the Grape Growers e-blasted to you as they come. So at the moment, I had a conversation yesterday with our health department. So for example, we have 3 houses, and every house is treated as a family unit. So we understand that the social distancing, I mean, obviously they need to do whatever is best, is not required there, the 2 meters, but again, but as soon as they're in the fields, as soon as they're in the workplace, as soon they need that physical distancing. Having said that, we know that the Ministry of Labor and even the Integrity Commission is poking in their noses now, and it could very well be that the Ministry of Labor has different guidelines. It is an ongoing process. OFVGA and farms are very active on this. So, and it will depend on the health departments of the specific regions. Ours are saying every individual house has to be treated as a family unit. So, so I guess that's the answer right now. If it changes, we will inform you. I don't know if that answers your question, Ed. No, let me know, right? So. But having said that, if do the quarantine period, the physical distance in the houses is required. So when they first come and they go into quarantine for 2 weeks, physical distance of 2 meters is required. And actually, I don't know if you've seen the latest email from Service Canada. They are actually asking you have to document it with pictures. Take pictures, measure the distance from bed to bed, and document this. Always document, right? So a lot of it changes pretty well daily, and every day I have a phone call with Bill George, and they are really they're working very hard on this, and give them a lot of credit. I always say after this, I think Bill George and Ken Forza, they need to retire after this. They are just it's almost a 24/7 job to them right now.
Matthias, I'll turn to another question regarding what you just said. Yesterday we had a letter saying to measure your table how far apart. Well, I don't think that was in the list before, and nobody in our group wants to go into that house. We have the beds measured and other things measured, but that has not been taken a picture of. What do I do?
You can go into, you're talking about the guys in quarantine, right? If you're talking about the guys who are in quarantine, you can go in there.
Yes. So a lot of the questions that they asked to do, is after they've been quarantined for a week.
Yeah.
So
I understand it, Doug. I hear you. It's like I said, it changes every day, and so you can't obviously not do this safely. Maybe you could ask your guys to take a picture and send it to you if they have a phone and access to internet. Maybe that's what you want to do. Doug, yeah, you can't go in the house. You're not supposed to go in there, obviously. But maybe the guys can take.
Yeah,
a
that
picture
works.
and
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Thanks.
Yeah, and then I hear you, because it is kind of I want to call it frustrating, because it does change pretty well daily, right? And they will take this serious. They will do audits. They will do virtual audits, and between the Integrity Commission federally and then the Ministry of Labor now and the Health Department. So I can only encourage you to do what's right, and it goes back. I think if you do from the onset, do what is right, and they come in and see something that's not totally compliant, they're going to just ask you to change it possibly, But again, OFMVGA and farms are trying. It also got to be, we got to be able to do it out there. They can't just put, restrictive policies on there that we're not even going to be able to do them. So it's an ongoing process. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
So we're coming up on the hour mark. If anyone has any last minute questions, otherwise, by all means, feel free to reach out to the GGO or CCOVI or Matthias with any questions you might have. And we will be posting this online. So we'll be blasting that link out to everyone for those who weren't able to participate, or for those who wanted to cross-reference with some of the slides that were discussed. But thank you all for joining us today.
Yes, thank you. And like I said, if any questions, you can reach out to me. If somebody's on the GGO webpage, and all of you guys have it, don't hesitate to call me, call the GGO office. We'll try to answer it, try to help out wherever we can. And if we don't have the answer, we'll try to get it for you. So, and like I said, send us an email, send Ellen an email if this webinar was helpful. I thought Jim did a great job. Thank you very much, Jim. We have other great experts at Ms. Covey, Sud, and Debbie. We'll see if we can make good use of some of our industry partners and put another webinar on. So, and I want to encourage you, there's also a webpage for OGWI or CGCN, and a lot of the projects we've done in the past, they're posted there, and some very good information there as well. So thank you very much. Thanks, Eleanor. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, everybody, for participating.
Thank you very much. And everyone stay safe, and don't be afraid to reach out to any of us at CCOVI, that's for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.